The Jedi Fallen Order mod we've all been waiting for is finally here. Take a look at this.
I'm stepping back.
Yes, it's possible to slice the limbs off stormtroopers, just like we could all the way back in Jedi Outcast. That game has the best dismemberment in any Star Wars game and was one of the first and only games to do so. Outcast was released all the way back in 2002, and since then, very few other Star Wars games have featured dismemberment. We had the Revenge of the Sith movie tie-in back in 2005 with very limited dismemberment, very scripted, kind of just clone troopers would lose an arm here and there. And then the Force Unleashed 2 in 2010, and since then, no other Star Wars game has featured the ability to do this to other humanoid characters. Apart from LEGO Star Wars, of course. LEGO games have always had this, and don't tell me you weren't slicing off C-3PO's limbs every time you got the chance. Hey everyone, it's Andrew. Now, I don't think it's fair to say Jedi Fallen Order doesn't have any dismemberment. You can slice up most non-human creatures, and this includes pretty much everything from the Skaz to ancient temple guards to droids. Even the Haxian Brood bounty hunter droids lose their limbs if you trigger the finisher moves, and these are probably the closest to humanoids that we have in the game. And in the lead up to Jedi Fallen Order's launch, there was a lot of discussion around whether the game would feature human dismemberment for the sake of realism, in the hopes that the Fallen Order developers would move away from the Disneyfication of the lightsaber. We never wanted these slightly sharper than a baseball bat laser swords. We want the prequel stuff, the stuff capable of doing this. The prequel era lightsaber is probably the best representation of what a lightsaber is capable of. They're deadly powerful. So when Jedi Fallen Order released with a combination of the two, lightsabers were met with some feedback. Lightsabers are what I call speciest in Jedi Fallen Order. The game has selective dismemberment, only taking the limbs off specific creatures and none that are human. But why is it okay to cut all these other creatures up, but not humans? As good a game Jedi Fallen Order is, I think this is one detail lots of people still feel is missing. Lightsaber mechanics are great, and yes, it's cool leaving these scorch marks and cauterizations on stormtroopers, but it's still no dismemberment. The game does, however, have this grab and stab move, probably one of the most brutal finishes in the game, and this falls within the limits of what the developers were able to do with the game's T rating, or M in Australia, where I'm from. I think for a modern game with modern graphics and realism, having dismemberment as a major gameplay mechanic would be a big step up in violence and would increase the game's age restrictions. We could look to a game like Mortal Kombat, although this is jumping to the absolute extreme, but this series glorifies dismemberment and violence like no other game. And obviously the age rating reflects this, and there's games like Blood Metal. This game makes violence its core mechanic. And what about a very similar game to Fallen Order in terms of combat mechanics and style, released within the past year, Ghost of Tsushima. This game has a similar combat control system to Fallen Order, but takes sword fighting a step further, introducing different stances and techniques to level up on the skill tree. And you'd think that a game focused on sword fighting with this amount of gore would feature dismemberment, right? Well, it does, but it's not as frequent as you might think. It only happens very rarely when you perform a mythic attack, unlocked later in the game. Ghost of Tsushima has an M rating in the US for blood and gore and intense violence. So this is a step above Jedi Fallen Order. So for a game with an M rating to only have this level of violence and dismemberment, which by the way is the same level rating as Mortal Kombat 11, that also got an M for intense violence and gore. But this might give you an idea of why Jedi Fallen Order has decided to avoid dismemberment altogether in terms of humans, which keeps it in the teen rating. After all, this game's major target demographic is teenagers, so if the game was given a higher rating, meaning teens wouldn't be able to buy it, it'd probably heavily be affected in sales and wouldn't have performed as well. Though what I find so interesting about all of this is that The Force Unleashed 2 also has a teen rating and yet features human dismemberment of stormtroopers. Wait, what? The ESRB rating for Fallen Order states lightsaber strikes often impale enemies enemies, and some attacks cause dismemberment to stormtroopers, though in a non-gory, non-bloody manner. Perhaps it's fair to say that Fallen Order is more violent than The Force Unleashed 2, just because of its combat system, style, updated graphics, realism, but back in 2010, The Force Unleashed 2 was pretty much as good as it got. Although not one of the most stunning looking games for its time, this was still pretty good for 2010, and I'm sure in another 10 years we'll be looking back on Fallen Order and seeing how its graphics have also aged. So why was The Force Unleashed 2 able to get away with dismemberment and still have the teen rating, and Jedi Fallen Order can't do that? In what ways is Jedi Fallen Order more violent than The Force Unleashed 2? And even though The Force Unleashed 2 doesn't show gore and blood and uses similar cauterizations to Fallen Order, it's hard to see why this game still falls into the teen rating and has dismemberment and Jedi Fallen Order doesn't. It's a fine balance, but I'd be interested to know if this has anything to do with the mouse upstairs. Now, there are two different types of dismemberment in game development. Dynamic dismemberment is the first, which is kind of like what we saw in Jedi Outcast. Where you swing is pretty much where you cut. A lot of modern games have this style of dismemberment, such as Doom, Dying Light, Fallout 4. It takes a lot of processing and engine power to build this, but is the most realistic kind of gore you can get. And then there's scripted dismemberment, which is what you're seeing here. Each time you cut, the enemy will dismember the same way, kind of like a scripted animation. This is what the Revenge of the Sith game had. Here you see every stormtrooper Cal kills loses their legs and arm. Ghost of Tsushima also tackles dismemberment like this. The same arm falls off the same way each time you perform this move. It becomes part of the character's death animation, and that's exactly how this is working here in Fallen Order. This dismemberment mod was created by Alex Poe and isn't currently publicly available, but the only way to achieve dismemberment in Fallen Order's engine is to make it become part of the character's death animation. And each different humanoid character requires further programming to make dismemberment unique to that character. For example, the Stormtrooper will only ever lose his legs and his arm, as that's what the modder has programmed him to do. But the Scout Trooper, for example, or the Purge Trooper, defeating these characters can be programmed differently, and they'll lose different limbs. This is something the modder is working on, bringing a full dismemberment mod to Jedi Fallen Order, but the process is a grind. Having to create tools to manipulate the game engine, then having to actually use those tools to modify the game, make it behave differently to how it was intended, it's something I wouldn't even begin to wrap my head around. Just ridiculous. But just the fact this is possible, finally, almost a year since Jedi Fallen Order's released, we're seeing some kind of realism in lightsaber physics. Now, the only problem is, each time the character's killed, regardless of how they're killed, dismemberment will occur. Whether slicing with a lightsaber or force pushing them into the ground or a wall, limbs will go flying. Stormtrooper exploding into several pieces from the sheer trauma of a force push. It's pretty funny. So what about Jedi Fallen Order's sequel? Is it possible that the next game in the series will have dismemberment? Well, after the release of a game like Ghost of Tsushima, which, like I said, took lightsaber mechanics one step further, I think it's likely we could see some significant upgrades to Fallen Order's combat system. Ghost of Tsushima, I think, has set the bar for these types of games. It's set the example and will be influential in how future saber combat will be designed. And with that said, the Fallen Order sequel will likely introduce new combo moves, finishes, and Jedi abilities, making the lightsaber combat system more advanced than ever before. Fallen Order sequel is still several years away, so all of this is of course speculative, but it'll be interesting to see how both combat and dismemberment hopefully evolve. So, do you still think Jedi Fallen Order needs dismemberment, or did you like the combat system and what they did with it? And how do you think its combat will evolve in the next game? Let me know in the comments. And a few weeks ago, I took a look at one of the rarest secrets in Fallen Order, the mystery of the Zepho, and how this event here showcases their demise. You can watch that video here, and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and join my Discord for lots more Star Wars news, Star Wars gaming, everything Star Wars, and everything else. And thanks for watching this. My name's Andrew. I'll catch you soon.
Stay bombastic.